Alright, hello Bellezas, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here then just welcome. Hi, my name is Brenda. I do paranormal videos here on my channel, so if that is something that you are interested in, please consider subscribing down below and turn on all your post notifications so you do not miss when I post another video like this one. Now with all of that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into today's video. Alright, hello everybody, happy Friday and welcome back to a new video. Today, I'm just gonna get right into it. Today we are going to be reading some stories that are particularly set in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico has been on my mind a lot recently, especially with Bad Bunny's new album. Yes, I am a very big fan of his music, and obviously his most recent album has a lot of songs that are centered on Puerto Rico and everything that is going on with, or that has been going on for years and years, when it comes to of them trying to be independent and trying to free themselves from the colonizers and all of that. And I feel like not a lot of love for Puerto Rico when it comes to their people and their culture and the whole place on its own. You know, I feel like I don't hear too many things about Puerto Rican folktale or folklore, any of their history or any of that. And I wanted to show them a little love, show the people and Puerto Rico as a whole some love, and read some stories that have taken place there. I'm just going to do a couple of stories. I wasn't able to find too many. There are, I think, maybe 13 submissions, and I believe like 7 or so of the stories are by the same person that lives in Puerto Rico, so not too many. And this is from the website yourghoststories.com. I always love reading stories off of here, especially because it has been around for so long and people have submitted stories since like way before 2008. I don't even know what the oldest story on there, like when it was submitted, but they have a lot of really good stories on there. So anyway, let's go ahead and start with this first story, which was submitted by Escorpiona on September 22nd, 2016. And she says, I have been reading stories on this site for over 8 years, a lurker, and only recently joined. This is my first story as told to me by my grandmother, my mother, and her sister. It's the reason I read stories on this site. My family is from the island of Puerto Rico. This is a place in my heart that brings to mind hot sunny days on the beach, great food, cold beers, and loud music. My mother moved to the Bronx in New York City when she and her cousins were teens, early 1950s, and this is where I was born and grew up. Being Latin and from the Caribbean, I was raised Catholic and knew of the existence of Santeria, though no one in my family practiced this religion. My grandmother's parents were from Spain and came to Puerto Rico in the late 1800s and tried to raise their 7 children in the rural countryside. Misfortune plagued them as my grandmother's mother died in childbirth, leaving a man to raise 7 children by himself. Times were tough and he was poor, and so he left them in the care of relatives while he worked in the city, and one day he never returned. They were divided and grew up among other relatives' families and were raised separately but remained in touch all throughout their lives, with the exception of the youngest female, who was placed in an orphanage. My grandmother was the second eldest. She obtained a job as a servant in a rich city woman's home doing laundry, cooking, and cleaning. Grandma could press a shirt so stiff it could stand up by itself, was one of my family's best cooks, and was absolutely ridiculous about cleanliness. When she saved enough money, she took the youngest sibling out of the orphanage and they lived together. Grandma was somewhat educated considering she only went up to 7th grade. She could read and write very well. She didn't attend school much because of an affliction. This affliction, Grandma said, started around the age of 9. You and I would know it today as epilepsy, but not so fast. This was not so simple to diagnose in the 1920s, nor was much known about the illness, even to this day. She said she would feel strange, like an out-of-body experience, where she couldn't move or speak and then would lose consciousness, day or night, wherever she might be. She said she would wake up on the floor of a classroom, the street, a train, or bus, with cuts, bruises, and dirt, and once at the bathroom of a mountain slope where her family members found her because of the screams and cries of my infant mother. Yes, Grandma married twice. Sadly, both times the marriages failed. I've never met my mother's father. Because of this affliction, my mother grew up and spent her adolescence with my grandma's younger sister, the one from the orphanage, who had married and had 4 sons. My mom was her princess. So eventually, due to hard times in Puerto Rico, our families moved to New York City, and this is where I was born. My mother had married young, 18, and had me by 19. My grandmother lived with my mother's sister/aunt in the Bronx, second marriage, who was 7 years younger than my mom. Grandma couldn't work because of her affliction, and my aunt, as a very young teen, was forced to cope with what life threw at her. Grandma would tell me that sometimes she would have up to 9 seizures in one day. She said she would know when a seizure was about to happen because she could see what she described as flying naked angels descending upon her, and that would be the last thing she remembered. She would tell me about the different horrific tests that were run on her at hospitals trying to diagnose, treat, and learn about epilepsy, why so many seizures, and try to control them with experimental medication available at the time in the 1960s that caused more harm than help. Doctors thought at times that she was insane or had a brain tumor, but nothing showed on these tests. She was rapidly deteriorating. One time, it was so bad that my poor aunt was crying on the steps of her tenement building, thinking that any day she would find my grandma dead. My aunt said that she sat there sobbing when an elegantly dressed Latin mulatta lady, half black, half white, Doña Lidia, asked her why she was crying, and my aunt explained to her what was going on. She said the lady just held her hand and said in Spanish, "I want you to come to a velada tonight and we'll take care of your mother." I met Doña Lidia later on in life. She was, as best as I can describe, always dressed in a tight white cotton dress. She had a curvy body, big bosom, smelled real good, like flowers, and was always wiping sweat off her forehead with a white cloth handkerchief. Being near her made you feel good. For those of you who are not familiar with a velada, it is a term used in Santeria religion. And here is a best effort translation from Spanish. A velada is a spiritual ceremony that is done within a cult, where the person to whom the ceremony will be performed on lays down, sits or stands within a circle of symbols, physical or drawn, bones, chicken feet, goat hooves, chalk-drawn crosses, etc., and many candles. The purpose of the ceremony is to cleanse a person's spirit. That evening, Grandma said she and my aunt went together across the hall to Doña Lidia's apartment. She said the apartment smelled strongly of incense. The only source of light were the many lit candles, all white, and there was a huge altar against one wall with many large and small statues of saints, and offering dishes in front of these statues containing cash, fruit, eggs, and small juju bags containing God knows what. There were other people there, all dressed in white and holding hands. This is how best I remember my grandma describing what happened next. She was seated in a chair in the middle of the living room, and Doña Lidia brought out this young, dark-skinned man. She said he looked thin but very strong and had a piercing gaze, sure of himself. He and Doña Lidia both began to chant and pray around my grandma, and all the while drizzling her with what she thinks was holy water and blowing smoke into her face and around her. This went on for a while. Then suddenly she feels the naked angels coming down. She says that this time she didn't lose consciousness, but how she best describes it as seeing through someone else's eyes. She saw the naked angels fighting and scratching this young man, and he fought back. They flew around fast and angry. My young aunt describes it as seeing a ritualistic dance. The young man would wave his arms around my grandma as if fighting off unseen things. The others in the room were all chanting and swaying their arms. The young man still moving and sweating profusely until suddenly he fell to the floor exhausted. Then Doña Lidia took over, placing her hands on Grandma's forehead and praying and chanting until Grandma says she fell asleep. Grandma said she woke around 2 a.m. Everyone had left except for Doña Lidia and the young man who told my grandma that she had had a phenomenon attached to her all this time, and they were able to get rid of it. What does phenomenon translate to? My guess is something not of this world. My grandma never had a seizure again and lived to a ripe old age of 92. She loved the Mets and the Yankees, knew every player and yelled while watching the games, lol. Because of my parents getting divorced, we moved in with my grandma and aunt when I was about 5. This was just after my grandma's velada. I never saw my grandma have a seizure, but learned of the affliction when I was a teen. I fondly remember Doña Lidia, God bless her soul, and going to her apartment in the daytime, and it was scary to say the least. She said to never touch or take anything from the altar, and trust me, I never dared to. I do remember going to her place of business once, Botanica, for another evening velada. I was around 10 years old. I don't know who it was for, as children weren't allowed to watch. So while this took place upstairs, my younger brother and I explored the place, ground floor and cellar. Wow, there were all kinds of stuff and smells. There was a goat head on a wall, animal feet hanging from the ceiling on ropes, all dried out looking, potions and candles of all colors and smells, seashells, bones, juju bags, chalks of all colors, and live chickens. My aunt got very involved in all this, understandably, but to a degree that we all thought was too unhealthy, obsessed. Weird stuff happened to her. That will be in another story. Safe to say, she later married and moved out and eventually stopped the belief/practice. Grandma was always Catholic and prayed daily. She said, "Good will always prevail over evil." And I strongly believe that to this day. Sorry for this long story, but I wanted to capture as much as I could remember. I wrote and rewrote it over the course of 2 days. That is so absolutely insane to kind of be thrown into something like this. I don't really understand it too much, but if you're living with something like what may seem like epilepsy and you don't have a cure to it, and you're living in a time where there's not a lot of research on stuff like this, I feel like maybe you are desperate enough to see if somebody could help you in any way. And it doesn't seem like she knew what she was getting herself into. She kind of just agreed to the help from Doña Lidia and she went along with it, and obviously it helped her, but we don't know exactly what that entailed, like if she was giving anything else up or if this was just something that they were doing out of their own kindness of their heart. But still, it was very intriguing, a lot of crazy things going on in this story, but they were all very entertaining and just very fun to learn about. And I'm glad that she lived till she was 92 without any more issues from that point on. It's already hard enough to have to leave your home, because of the troubles that were and are still happening in Puerto Rico. But this was a very good story, very well written, and I really enjoyed it. And now we're gonna do one more story on here because that one was already a long one. All right, this one is submitted by Zara C, and it's called The First Encounter, written on November 26, 2007. Also, of course, in Puerto Rico. The year, if I'm not mistaken, was 1984. I know because I was getting ready to start kindergarten. I lived in a town called Carolina in Puerto Rico, about 30 minutes away from San Juan, the capital. The house we lived in was shared between my Aunt Mercedes and my mom. It was left to us by my paternal grandmother, Anna. She passed away soon after I was born. I have no early recollection of what her face looked like, since the only 2 pictures of us together are missing her face. As with any small barrio, Ceramica had its share of ghost stories and folktale. Unfortunately for me, one was my grandma. She was said to be a strong, tall woman of very dark skin. The neighbor gossiped about how men would fall head over heels for her. I hated all the rumors, especially since most people claimed I looked like her a lot. My full name is Zarani, the last part of it dedicated to her. I never really paid much attention to all the stuff being said until one night. This drunk woman, who was the oddball in town, came to my house and claimed she had my grandmother's nails and hair in a container in her medicine cabinet. She said since my grandma was a witch, she waited till they buried her and cut them herself to do black magic or brujeria. It made me so mad. I ran out of the house. I went to my backyard. It was a nice night out with a full moon. Often I would sit by the fruit trees and imagine myself in New York. I had just returned and I loved the train. There I was just looking up at the moon when I heard a hoot on a guanabana tree. I stepped closer to see what it was and I nearly screamed when I looked into a pair of yellow eyes. An owl? In Puerto Rico? Weird, but it just stared at me for long minutes. An odd feeling came over me. I could not move. My jaw was locked in place. My heart was drumming in my ears. I could hear my mother calling me, but I could not move. I must have blanked because when I focused again, there was the figure of a woman sitting on the branch of that tree. She was quiet, just staring at me. So I screamed, and I kept screaming till my mother came running. My backyard neighbor was shouting at my mother that she had been in the yard when I came out and she saw me look up, and that she too looked up and saw something dark sitting on the tree. Together, they took me inside. Although my legs refused to work, and they prayed over me and practically choked me on holy water. After that incident, I was forbidden to go outside alone. It didn't stop my problems from coming indoors. I would constantly jump because I would see things walking past doorways or looking through the windows. It became almost impossible for me to sleep unless I was with a grown-up. One such time, my mother and my aunt told me they had finally got me to sleep when they saw me walk out of the room and start to crawl halfway down the back hallway. When they followed me, they both saw a woman dressed in white crawling ahead of me. This I don't remember, but I'm glad they were there to get me. A series of events occurred after that, and I feel the need to warn people who are sensitive to these situations. Things started moving around the house. Items would disappear for days, then show up on countertops. My mom kept getting pinched. Right now, as I'm writing, I have a feeling of heaviness around my throat, difficulty swallowing. We moved from the house because one night, as I lay awake between my mother and sister, I had the urge to go to the bathroom. I kept trying to hold it in because I felt terrified of waking my mom or my sister, Zilkia. I counted sheep, I sang baby songs. Almost in tears, I gave up and closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable embarrassment of wetting my bed. Then I got this feeling again. It's hard to describe. My limbs become very heavy and I get really cold. My skin pinpricked. I could not move. I looked up at the ceiling like a doll. There was a mist that grew heavier until I could make out a face and hands. It floated on top of us, hovering back and forth, and I felt breathing near my face. Hands caressed my face and arms. It felt like a doctor was prodding me for injuries. Then I noticed the eyes, big and dark, and I panicked. I have no idea how, but kicking and gagging, I woke my mom and sister, and they saw me laying there and started screaming. Whatever it was went under the bed and shook the rooms to the core. Lamps fell and wind for the love of God, came rushing from everywhere, but I could not move. I just closed my eyes and prayed as hard as I could for as long as it took, and when it was all over, I peed on the bed and blacked out. We moved a lot after that. The incident marked all of us. It definitely scarred me because it seemed to open up sensors in me that took years to understand and control. My clairvoyance got very strong. I get premonitions often, and even though I still can't understand this part, I can see spirit sometimes. I welcome all honest readers to give me a first, second, and even third opinion to what is wrong with me, and to refer me to a good psychiatrist if you believe I suffer an illness. Thank you for taking your time to read the beginning of my life. Oh my gosh. Girl, you know, being a clairvoyant sometimes seems like a lot of work, obviously. Just so much that you have to do with your mental health and your well-being. And I feel like this is all that it is, just based on these events alone. And I honestly don't know what it could be. Like, I feel like maybe there are just people out there that have a third eye and a sixth sense, and these things just kind of happen to them, and there's no explanation, because it kind of seems very out of the blue, and it doesn't seem like it's just something psychological alone. Of course, it could be some kind of sleep paralysis, sleepwalking, like that sort of element. And when things like that are occurring to you, your mind is trying to fill in the blank spots, and obviously other people are going to see you when you're sleepwalking or when you're stuck in sleep paralysis and stuff like that, and those things are very explainable. But there are some things that are just not, and all of these eerie things happening without any reason is not very usual. There has to be some kind of paranormal aspect to it. And I feel like there is a lot of paranormal energy in Puerto Rico, just like in a lot of other places where there have been gruesome events that have happened, or any place with a dark past. I really enjoyed the story though, and I 100% believe this person has some kind of psychic abilities of some sort and not a mental illness. But I am not a doctor, and I hope that after all this time since she's posted this, that she has found a balance in her life and maybe a way to cope with all of this and all of these experiences. But yeah, that's it from me, guys. That's gonna be the last story. I hope that you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought about these, and whether you would like me to read some more stories from yourghoststories.com, because I always have such a fun time doing so. But yeah, if you made it all the way to this point in the video, make sure to leave a little Puerto Rico flag down below. That way I know who stayed all the way to the end. And if you did, I really, really appreciate you. I love you so much. And me and you are besties. You already knew that. And also, before I end the video, today's comment shout out goes to this person right here. Thank you so much for leaving a nice comment. As always, I really appreciate it, and it really makes my day. And if you want to be in the next comment shout out, all you have to do is leave me a nice comment down below, and that's it. Thank you again so much for watching. Hopefully I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to stay safe and be kind. Bye bye.